Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Alex and today I am doing a spoiler-free review of Our Share of Night by Mariana Enriquez. To tell you a little bit of what this story is about, it is set in 1980s Argentina with our characters Juan and his son Gaspar as they travel to a family estate. The estate is home to an immortality cult that seeks to use Gaspar for personal gain, and Juan will do everything in his considerable power to stop them. After the reading month that I had in March, I wanted a fresh start. A clean slate. Something that I could really sink my teeth into, and I thought that this was an excellent choice. When I began the story, I really liked it. I was immediately sucked in, and I could also tell, of course, that it was a translated work based off of the writing style, but that didn't bother me. It didn't seem to have any info dumps as the details were revealed naturally as the story progressed. The imagery was lively, and I didn't feel bogged down. The lack of chapter breaks was a little difficult because there are no traditional chapters in this book. It's told in chunks, and sometimes those chunks are over 100 pages long, which can seem like one section spans a really long time. But each chunk does give you a different perspective and also can sometimes show a different time period. I would definitely say in the beginning I had no problems, right? I was feeling super good about it, but this book is 588 pages, and by the time I got to around page 200, my goodwill immediately began to decline. The narrative started to drag hard, and I recognize that entire sections of the book could have been completely cut out in order for it to be told more effectively. Between the time jumps and the random flashbacks, it can be a little bit difficult to parse out what has already happened versus what is happening right now. Not horribly, but those things do occur even within the same chapter. It's obviously easier to tell that there's a time jump when you get to a new section and it tells you what years that section is supposed to take place in, but we get flashbacks all the time, which absolutely confuses things. It's disjointed in places where it should be linear, which is not helped by the fact that this book is extremely dense. This is essentially a horror story that lacks horror elements. It starts off really strong in the beginning of the book and then fades the more that the book progresses until the ending is almost void of horror elements completely. There was too much backstory, not enough meat and potatoes, and it got to the point where every time that I picked up this book, I just felt completely exhausted and it was putting me to sleep. My biggest pet peeve is how the author told rather than showed us what was going on. She would recount endlessly things that had already happened rather than us getting to experience them ourselves, and that made it extremely boring in huge sections of the book. I would read and feel like I wasn't getting anywhere, to the point where I even wanted to get through the exciting sections of the story just so that it would be over. If you can envision my reading slump after March as me standing in a 6-foot pit, the beginning of this book pulled me out a good 5 feet and I could see the light. And then the more that I kept reading it, it was like somebody came and just dumped a truckload of dirt on me. It lacks a solid plot, definitely meanders. What is told to us as the main conflict of the story is resolved fairly early on, and then we have hundreds of pages where it just doesn't matter until the author arbitrarily decided that it does again. Don't ask me why, it just does. There's also this weird way that dialogue is handled randomly, where there will be a paragraph of characters talking to one another, but there are absolutely no quotation marks. So it can be difficult to tell where one character's statement ends and another one begins. And this is the only story where I think I have ever seen that before, and it wasn't horrible to adjust to. Like, you could definitely get through it pretty easily, but it just bothered me because I wanted the distinction between which characters were saying what. And that happens often. It's widespread throughout Our Share of Night. For a little extra context, in addition to being a fiction author, Mariana Enriquez is also a journalist, and I could tell in here that she has a great passion for talking about the Argentina Liberation Army. There's a lot of political commentary in here, which is important for something like a history book, but unfortunately, it greatly detracted from the overall story and the horror elements. The Liberation Army is brought up all the time and has absolutely nothing to do with Juan and Gaspar's story, so it really is a distraction overall. By the time I got to the end of this, it felt more like a political history commentary book with horror elements rather than a horror story, and it's amazing to be a journalist, and I can tell that Enriquez is quite talented. But in this case, it came through just a little too prominently. She went from no info dumps and keeping up this mystery of us trying to figure out what's going on and why these things are happening till about the halfway point. And then after that, she just gives us the answers to everything that we could possibly want to know about in an unnecessary fashion. It completely ruined the mystique of the book. The story probably should have been about 250 pages shorter, and I think if that had been the case, it would have been more effective, and it would have also left more to the imagination. The kind of tropes that you can expect in here are supernatural horror, child mediums, and to a much lesser extent, existential horror. It's a small part, but it is a part nonetheless. I do want to give trigger warnings for what you can expect from Our Share of Night, the greatest of which is going to be graphic child abuse. That is where most of the horror elements came from, to be honest with you. But there is also sexual abuse, sexual content in general, emotional abuse, physical abuse, and suicidal ideation. Probably the grossest part with regards to the child abuse is the fact that in the beginning of the book, it's definitely framed as being horrible and something that is negatively impactful for a child, and then as the story continues, it basically becomes justified. I'm not going to tell you why or how that happens, but it does. And that was something that really bothered me because I don't like this message of, well, if you hurt your child for the right reason, then it's okay. I had a sad realization while reading Our Share of Night that some of the elements reminded me of one of my least favorite books of all time, which is House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. So if you love this book or found it really interesting, you may end up really enjoying Our Share of Night, but I definitely didn't. Some similarities are the inclusion of liminal spaces and obsession with sex. And I'm not saying that there's just general sexual content in here because that doesn't bother me in books, but there is a fetishization of gay sex, and it is just included in here for no reason. And I know that that sounds weird and you have no idea what I'm talking about, and if you think that I sound like a bigot, I promise you I do not have any issues whatsoever with same-sex couples having romantic relationships. It's the way that the author writes those scenes and the way that she talks about it that makes me feel like it's fetishized. Like, it made me uncomfortable in a way that I don't think it was supposed to, which says a lot. And part of the message in here was originally a good one, which is that people in the 1980s in Argentina were very prejudiced against gay people and how, you know, being gay isn't a bad thing. And that message is wonderful, but she takes it a step too far that I just don't want to get into. But if you've read this, hopefully you know what I mean. And of course we have characters that are deeply unlikable. Juan is not a good person and we're really not supposed to like him, although sometimes he can be sympathetic, which makes me feel terrible to say. Gaspar and Steven are both interesting characters that I liked a lot, and I would definitely say that Gaspar is the most likable of all of them, at least up to a certain point. So when you start reading this book, you'll probably latch on to him and think that he's this really cute and sweet kid. Everyone seems to be a product of their past, which is why I do want to give Enriquez credit for her depiction of therapy. We have characters in here that go to therapy, and that is portrayed in an incredibly positive and helpful way, which I love because that's not often shown in books. So kudos to her, at least for that. I sure as shit know that House of Leaves didn't have therapy in it because Johnny Truant would have benefited from that significantly. Enriquez is focused on building atmosphere and dread, which are positive things, but then shifts abruptly to telling us too much in too many words, which is why I am giving Our Share of Night 2 stars. I want to emphasize that this is a deeply unpopular opinion. I am only one of 5% of people who gave this a 2-star or lower. So if you are interested in horror and you decide to read this, statistically, you are more likely to enjoy it than me. So I just want to say, don't take my word for it. I'm not going to dissuade you from reading this. I just wanted to share my take on it and that I really did not enjoy this book. Please let me know down in the comments if Our Share of Night is a book that you have read or are interested in reading, because I would love to hear your thoughts. And as always, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, that you all stay safe out there, and I'll see you next time.